Let us reiterate again that we should not be judgmental and ignore any section of the people other than those who are wielding power to gratify their greed. We may outwardly belong to many religions or geographies, but we have the same goal. We are the Yugantar. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Chandigarh Literary Society, Suparna Saraswati Puri welcomes everybody to a very interesting and hopefully a scintillating who meanders from chemical engineering during his graduation and following up the creative strands of being a very seasoned writer whose book we are going to talk about today. Yugantar, the dream of making Bharat Varsh 2,300 years ago. Very contextual, very relevant, and extremely captivating, a novel, a piece of fiction. These lines were from the book. As I shared, Raghavan Srinivasan, namaskar, good evening.
Namaskar.
It's a pleasure, Raghavan, and I will begin by asking a very cliched query. You enjoy a great deal of passions, from literature to being called a student of the past, history in particular, with season focused on economics, which is your core competency. Why and how did you think of writing Yugantar?
That's a good question, Suparna. And before I answer that question, thanks to the organizers and all the people who made this possible, and particularly to Suparna, who unbelievable went through the novel in just one day, and now she has questions. Thanks a lot. So coming to the question, why I did a historical fiction. One is that fiction gives you that kind of leeway where you can present something in an interesting way through a story, through some characters. So fiction always, if you're giving the right message through fiction, it is much more effective than pedagogical novel, which non-fiction, which goes from, chronologically from one period to another. Like, for example, if I had written a non-fiction on history, then it would have had to follow particular constraints, particular chronological order. Whereas here, I could take a lot of leeway in, cutting across time boundaries, cutting across geographical boundaries. So that lent a lot of flexibility to me. And it was really a challenging, very, at the same time, I enjoyed it. This is my first fiction, and I had written stories and cover stories. But when I attempted this, and by the time I finished, it was a major job, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. The reason is that there were certain challenging things in this novel, which cut across, even though the time period is short, the story happens within a few years, but it is spread all over the subcontinent, and therefore it was very interesting. And it took some time to understand different aspects, different geographical areas, different the way the people live, and of course, as one entity, there is one Bharatavarsha, and that is what I tried to discuss in the novel. That the point that I had tried to make, I could not have made it if I had started from the present. The idea was that there is a history, there is a rich tradition, a huge culture, and a traditional history that we have, and it is it is a great uh, asset with us, and it's very relevant today, because what happened 2300 years back uh, is so many things. I could just cover a few things in the novel. Many things were happening. It is not just the statecraft that was developing. An empire was coming into being, the Mauryan Empire, and along with it was the entire the constitution for the empire, the statecraft, the administrative structures, then the economic base. Everything happened together, and there were huge scientific advancements during that period. There was this Takshashila University, which was among the best in the world. So
Correct.
all this had to be brought into those many pages. And
I'm curious to know something as powerful as what you have shared. You're talking not only about a very expansive canvas of India, uh, India not in the terms and the definition of 20th or 21st century, but the subcontinent. And as you rightly said, the timeline, 4th century was a remarkably exciting period. And in that context, it's amazing. In 272 pages, a lot has been packed in. And as a writer, as a political commentator, as somebody who specializes in economics, as a curious reader, what is it that gives you a clear framework to sit down and draw a caricature which will echo or have a directive centuries down the line at any given point of time? I don't think Yugantar will ever go out. Were it to be picked up 15 years ago, I think it would have made sense then. Another 15 coming forward, it's going to make sense again. Your comments and thoughts on that?
yeah, that's very true. The canvas is pretty large, very expansive, and the subcontinent that we were talking about 2,300 years back, is even bigger than what is there now, and what is defined as Bharatavarsha, covers the entire subcontinent and parts of the Gandhara, and it goes beyond Afghanistan and all that. So it was many cultures intermingling at that time, and the 2 points that I wanted to establish in the novel. Number one is that there was an entity called Bharatavarsha that many years back, 2,300 years back, because there's a lot of doubt about that, whether, there were all so many kingdoms. And so I tried to establish that there was an entity, maybe not geographically one entity, but a cultural, historical entity was there. But it consisted of many kingdoms and many things happening throughout. But there were connecting strings to all those kingdoms and those empires. There was a certain commonly understood science, economics, the way the statesmanship, and all that. There were certain rules, like what they call dharma and raj dharma, which was accepted across the subcontinent. So these are the things that kept the thing together, and that is one thing I tried to establish. So I had to bring in many parts of Bharatavarsha. In fact, I could not, for want of time, and I did not want to stretch it too much, I left out Kalinga, which was very important. I left out Bengal, which has a very rich history. So I left out many parts of the subcontinent, so I could deal with only a few of them. And number two is very relevant today, because again we are asking the question that, are we united? What kind of unity? What are the lessons that we can learn from the past? Which, whenever we were united, we could withstand so many things. We could withstand onslaughts. We could be the premier country in terms of science, in terms of economics, culture, language. So many things developed. If you look at it, the way what we had 2,300 years, of course, it was so many centuries back. It could not have been in the modern sense. You cannot compare it. in terms of technology or advancements in science. But for that period, and compared to the rest of the world, we were far ahead of the rest of the world. And now we cannot say that. Today it is just that we sort of are questioning why are we behind on so many fronts. Now we have made some
Right.
advances. We
Very,
are ahead. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. You
Very
can.
interestingly, the book has some very prophetic statements that you make. For example, at some point, one of your characters, and on that note, I must compliment that the characterization is also done keeping in mind that the relevance of the story and the person who is saying whatever he or she is at a geographical location, at a particular episode in time, resonates throughout the corridor of history and politics and society. So one of these statements is that Bharatvarsh is a fun place. So, India is fun because the exotic element has always been the lure for the outsiders, but that is not what you're driving at. You are talking about the indigenous idea of what fun was to tribes, to the artisan guilds, to a regular common man. I mean, here is a time when you never saw a beggar. You didn't have deprivation as we see it today. There were pockets of slums, and the haves and have-nots, yes, were there, of course, thanks to the caste structure, Varna Pranali. Lekin the abject and apparent is somewhat subtle in your narrative. So statements like that, how did the author and the economist and the political commentator in you devise that play of expression?
That was very challenging, and I think that is what makes the novel interesting. When you take on many things, then you can bring in different perspectives and different aspects. Some people who are interested in economics will also like the novel. Somebody who is interested in politics, somebody who is interested in history per se, all of them. So it was meant for everyone. And when trying to bring all this different geographical areas, languages, and probably some cultures together. So one had to, you have to be there. You have to place yourself there. In fact, one of the comments that I got from readers was that it really transports them to that place at that particular time. And that I feel is a big success. I tried to recreate what was there at that time, what was the economy like, what was the politics, and how people lived at that particular time. And from the south to the north, it varies a lot. Of course, everything was not great at that time. It was a monarchy. Finally, whatever concepts of democracy that have evolved over a period of time, you can, of course, we have progressed a lot. But the kind of institutions at that time they had, and the republics which were vanishing at that time, and a new empire was coming, did involve a lot of, a chaotic situation, a lot of ups and downs in the various kingdoms, But at the same time, there were huge advances made during that period, and that is why I tried to connect. In fact, one of the biggest challenges was to try to connect the north to the south, because if you look at history, it is dealt with as two separate. There's northern history of North India, history of East India, and the history of South. And while you can read these different histories, at a particular point in time, when the Mauryan Empire was there, or when Alexander was invading the northwest, what was happening in the south? Were they just relaxing? They knew nothing. No, it was entirely connected at that particular point in time. And people in the south knew what was happening because they were seafarers, and there were all kinds of ports which were trading with West Asia and with Africa and Southeast Asia. So they would be knowing what was happening throughout the subcontinent. And same with the north. There was a lot of trade between the north and the south through the sea routes as well as um, the the road routes. And that is one more thing that I try to reconstruct the Uttarapata and the Dakshinapata, because
Yes,
what were they? How did they look like? What was it like to travel in those
yes,
roads? What were
yes.
the facilities that were there at that time? So these were some things which I feel will interest any reader. And maybe I have just tried to imagine to one level. It's very difficult to, you have to study more. And is any criticism, any additions to that, or any critical input into the novel will be very, very welcome.
Wonderful. I'm sure our viewers here are going to keep that in mind when they pick up their copy to read that. I am also interested in asking this question that from your story, uh, has Bharatvarsh been reduced to Bharat as a spectacle? Is that what you're trying to say? Because you have an array of interpretations in your preface, and your prologue sets the tone for the story in many ways because of the dialogues that you have given to your characters, uh, the absence of a Yug Purush, that there is no a hero. There can be a multitude of heroes. So Yugantar is a band, a brotherhood, a pack of people. So is there a subaltern view to what you're trying to say?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, I strongly believe that uh, an epochal change cannot be made by just one person. Kings and queens and various philosophers and all have been products of time, products of change. And
Correct.
at a particular point in time, as the society advances, then kings are able to, make empires, and philosophers are able to come out with their theory. So it is the material base which is very important for all these things, and that was very developing very fast. And with the steel industry and with the kind of scientific advancements, with the kind of discussion that is going on in the Takshashila University, you
Yes.
can really imagine that so many people were playing a role in creating a new Bharatavarsha at that point in time. It was not just one king or two kings. Like what I wanted to express in this novel is not just a history or not just a story of Chandragupta Maurya or just a story of Chanakya. They all had that part to play, but it was a story of everyone around the continent, everyone who contributed to this conception of Bharatavarsha. And so that is what I tried to bring out. Even though I quoted from Bhagavad Gita, what I feel the message is that when Krishna says that, whenever there is this inequity and this kind of chaos facing the
Yes.
world, then I will come again. What I have interpreted is that it is that Yug Purush is not just one individual, but it is society. It is people who are really creating products or the productive forces in society who can bring about that change. So through a novel, I have tried to explain this to the extent possible and try to build in a lot of characters. Of course, in a novel, you can only have 4 or 5 different characters. They sort of represent the entire subcontinent. They represent the thought. They represent the culture of the entire subcontinent. Now, coming to today's Bharat, I feel it is very vastly different and vastly unsatisfying, because if you look at the kind of vision that our forefathers had or our ancestors had in building that kind of a subcontinent, in building a concept at a subcontinental scale, I don't think, we have lost something somewhere, and many things have gone wrong. And today we find that India has lost its premier position in terms of many aspects in the world, is lagging behind on several things, in spite of being, the large population with a huge amount of resources. But what is it that we are looking today? I feel that there's a lot to learn from that 2,300 years back, what happened. And in selecting that Bharatavarsha, I mean, I just had to give a name to that concept. Okay, I thought of India, but that that
Didn't
concept
fit in.
was not there at that particular point in time. So
Correct.
I thought that this is, you know, it is a concept. It should not be taken as some kind of a religious or belonging to one particular religion. What I meant was that it is a concept which belonged to all the schools of thought at that particular point in time. And in that,
Yes.
again, I tried to deal with some schools of thought. What today is promoted as religion, they were not actually religious,
No, no, no.
purely
You're
religious schools
absolutely
of thought. And they say that there's 8 schools of thought, but I counted 18, including the Gnostic and the Astic sects. And even
yes,
between the Astic and the Gnostic, it is not
yes,
that it is a philosophy. It is not to do with belief or
yes.
unbelief. You know. So these are some
It's
things
a
that
healthy of dissent. Yes,
yeah, yeah. So we have to deal with it today. That is what is, when we talk about right to dissent and or right to conscience today, that is what we mean. That, there are these various schools of thought, and people have a right to think, and we have a right to differ, and we have a right to interpret the society around us in different ways. But it has to be constructive. At the end of it, society should advance. So these are some things that we need to relook at it again. I'm not sure whether I've done justice to all this. In fact, I try to discuss about the Vedic philosophy, Buddhism, and Jainism to some extent. Very, very, I would say, not at all. A scholar in Buddhism can find a lot of loopholes there, but I really wanted to deal with other theories like Charvaka and other so-called Gnostic
yeah,
sects, which were actually questioning the inequity in society. It is not
correct.
they were Gnostic because they didn't accept the today.
Very
Uh,
orthodoxy.
yeah,
Yes,
and that is what is happening today. If you don't accept the prevailing the dominant discourse, then you are termed as a rebel or something like that. And that is what at that point in time there was a clash between various schools of thought.
Also, taking a strand from what you just mentioned, um, the idea, there wasn't a term Hinduism, and there isn't, at least not in the Upanishads or the Vedanta. This realm does not talk about Hinduism as it is perceived by most people today. So, to that extent, the Vedas are actually scientific instruments of intellect, which are trying to put across a very simple premise for human mind, which is full of limitations. That in order to understand the bigger picture, the detailing is crucial. So, if Upanishads are the essence of darshana or philosophy, the spiritual outlook of Indian civilization as we understand it, there is an equally important practice, the Karam Kand and the Gyan Kand. So the Karam Kand is imperative in order to understand the Gyan Kand, and thereafter draw your own narrative of how you choose to practice your life on, whether it is material outlook or it is a more evolved ethos. So yes, um, yeah, I am very, very, how shall I say, intrigued. There's a chapter where you describe a tavern, an episode that takes place with few characters congregating and chatting. I slash it with a bar today. The scenario is totally different. But the detail of array of intoxicants, you have very specifically mentioned cocktails. You have spoken about ingredients. You have given a hint of what kind of beverage sets what kind of a mood, and all very subtly in the flow of a very intense political conversation among these very important characters. How did you draw that?
Yeah, one had to sort of weave a picture, make something look real. And every city that I discussed, and including on the road, you had to give, you had to bring something, bring it to life. And so you had to pick on something. Like, so that is how the tavern, there are books on beverages in ancient India, by the way, and very detailed books. So
Yes.
I read through a few of them. I didn't do a complete comprehensive kind of thing, but it struck me that that will add a flavor to what was
It
happening on the
does.
road. When the itinerant traders go from one city to another city, so they're faced with so many things. There is a tavern, very nice tavern, and then there are these bandits right
Yes.
next to them. And
Yes.
same way within a city, the roads, the gullies, the narrow paths, at the same time the beautiful parks. Like
Mm.
if you read the Mrichakatika, you get a
Yes.
fantastic picture of Ujjaini and its park,
Yes.
and the way
Yes.
people live there, and the Shipra River and all that. So,
Correct.
and the ports, the Brigukacha and the Muziris and the
Absolutely.
Kaveri, the Puhar, all of them have a big history. There are lots and lots of books. Like, for example, Madurai. I
Mm.
had to go through a fantastic poem on Madurai. It is a part of the 10. There are 10 poems, 10 idylls in Tamil. It's a collection, and
Correct.
one of the idyll is about Madurai, called Madurai Kanchi. So
Mm.
it's wonderful. It is an old set in old Sangam Tamil, just as Mirchakatika is in Sanskrit. You have to
Yes.
read the translations, but you get a good picture. It is fantastic. So it was very fruitful. Learned a lot, and tried to look at the original sources, and found a lot of even the way language has changed, because the way Sanskrit is written, in those times,
Yes.
agglutinative.
Yes.
When in one
Correct.
sentence you can express a para. Same with Tamil. If you look at
True.
modern Tamil is quite different. So it is the way that things evolve. So constructing a picture of different scenarios is
Yes.
again very interesting and challenging. So I try to do that to the best. Try to give each city character.
It's a very seamless walk through the entire story. In fact, at some point, I feel it is so convincingly communicated as if you are walking the lanes, whether it is Patliputra or it is Kaushambi or it is a port, and you speak of Mazuris. Uh, Mazuris today, there is a Kerala Tourism has set a proper passage to experience what like in ancient times. And I had the good fortune a few years ago to experience a boat ride from point A and the entire trail. So I do understand. You're talking about ethnic groups that came from outside. You're talking about the Yavanas, giving them a special place. You're talking about the dark colored from Africa. So is it the Moors that you're talking about? And you're talking about the yellow Yavanas, the Caucasians. You similarly have these interpretations where you're talking about the often referred to dialogue between Sikandar and Porus. And your interpretation is that the dynamics of those times could possibly have been such where these two thespians, these two iconic rulers, you know, did not fight. It was a draw. It was not about winning and losing. That could be just a pure fictionalized idea in somebody's mind, as is the case with a lot of literature that this period has churned out, the poems. Similarly, your focus on women in particular, your characters, when you've given voice to a widow in a Sangha, she is walking away from a household out of desperation to seek solitude and contribute worthwhile in a worthwhile manner towards a battle which is coming from nowhere, in a manner of speaking. she is empowered enough to refer to Yajnavalka's dialogue about Gargi being this very precocious woman with million questions and has to have a retort being told that don't ask so many questions, Gargi, your head will drop off, which is a telling comment on women, down the ages. So
Now, yeah.
it's fantastic that the nuances have been captured so beautifully. And I would like you to answer how not challenging, but how confusing can it be for an author at times to give a definite anchor to a character, particularly when you have such an intense plot?
Yeah, that's true. Now coming to all these things that you raised, one is that the foreigners on Indian soil, they were all part of uh, the the general society, and that is one thing which became very apparent, that everywhere you go, there were quarters, even separate quarters for them. So trade was very important. And Muziris, when you raise that question or when you refer to it, I feel very guilty because I really didn't do proper justice to the city. In fact, it was an outstanding city, and
Yes,
there was so much to say about Muziris, but I could not say that much. It comes much later in the story. And
yes,
about women, again, I feel I have really not done justice, because there are so many things I wanted to talk through the characters. But to one level, I had a doctor woman and uh,
yes,
a widow from a family. She had to, then she goes and joins the Sangha. And a third woman who actually is forced to work in a with a in a kind of establishment, an entertainment establishment, but actually she belongs to the tribe of steelmakers.
that's
So
right.
each one of them has a character. There's a lot to tell about them, and the struggles that they face in life. Again, it is only one aspect I could bring, and because society there at that time, it was a very difficult society, and today is even more difficult, I would say. At least at that point in time, there were various women who stood up and wrote books and wrote poems,
Yes,
and they played a big role in many things. And so that was a great thing at that particular point in time. So the story of the Yavanas, the story of the women, and the story of the cities, all this are, try to make the novel. Somewhere the novel may sound a bit towards the end, more of a documentary kind of thing, where you are trying to say many things, but probably that could not be avoided. I had to sort of, in the later chapters, make the point, at the same time try to make it interesting.
yes. I also feel that the remarkable time period in which this story germinated and manifested into a book is all of 12 to 16 weeks during a health disaster, COVID, which you credit it to be the perfect timing for you to churn this piece of work. So do share with us something about how that helped you.
It had been, I am very interested in history, and I've been reading books for a long time. I have thought that to write historical, both fiction and non-fiction, but writing a book is a very challenging thing. I could never find time for that. I had a professional life, and though I had written some cover stories and travelogues, still it never
Yes,
amounted to a proper research of a particular area. So it gave me some time, somewhere in December 2019, I started work on that. But of course, I had done a lot of reading earlier to that. I was quite familiar with the general history of the subcontinent, over a period
yes,
of time. And I had to select a particular period, so I thought this 2,300 years back, particularly Alexander's invasion and the Mauryan Empire coming to being, is a very great change that the subcontinent witnessed at that point in time. And that is a very challenging period, through a lot of questions in front of society at that point in time. So I tried to, one could have selected any other period. There were many such periods, many periods where India as a subcontinent has gone through challenges, has faced terrible odds and come out of it. And
Right.
so that is one period I selected, and I started work in December. I took about 3 to 4 months to finish, and definitely from February onwards, this COVID vacation helped me. I could spend a lot of time at home, um, you know, keep uh, rewriting my drafts. And it took another 4 months for editing and layout and all that. Lead Start, the publisher, gave me a lot of support, and so that was great work. The editing was excellent. So it took about, I would say, 8 to 10 months on the whole
Mhm.
to churn out that thing. But I feel that very reasonable kind of time to bring out a book. It takes that kind of time to get it to the bookstore. Uh, but anyway, it was very
Well,
enjoyable. All
a seasoned writer and a seasoned author can perhaps say that. I think with the kind of research that this novel demanded, it is pretty remarkable that within such a short period of time, you were able to get it out. Um, I think before we can take few questions, my last observation about this work is that in many respects, you are desirous of public opinion today should be a little more wanting in terms of asking questions. We come from an ethos where asking questions in the absence of, you know, not looking like a fool, uh, even a dialogue that you've given to your character, we have moved really far away from that to an ambience of pretense where, well, it's a farcical presentation. You have a glib sort of an exchange. So somewhere my takeaway from reading this novel was that you are prodding an ordinary, regular person that please do not give up that habit of asking questions, because that is indicative of wanting to change. And that is essentially the premise of your work, that we have within us and we can source not only strength, but many other variables necessary for a transformation at every level, economical to societal. And so to that extent, am I correct in drawing this analysis?
Definitely, you're on the dot. See, like Amartya Sen says that we are an argumentative society. It is true. We have been arguing, and all these arguments have amounted to something, and that is how we developed our philosophy. And by really, there are so many rules and regulations, and one can read volumes on how
Yes.
the rules for debating and the rules for consensus and the rule to really say something is valid. So this checking on the validity of something is a whole science, and that has been developed so well thousands of years back, I would say. So the idea of investigating into things and not taking for granted what you hear, what you what is a kind of majority media opinion that you get today is very essential in today's society, to question everything and to really find whether it is true or is it factual, to investigate what is the source. So these are all some things that I feel that we have lost from our ancient days, and we have to revive that. And throughout the Indian history, that has been very, very important to question, to come up with your own thoughts and develop your school of thought and develop the way you
So
analyze information.
Right. Please.
Yeah, so it is very relevant, I feel, and this various darshanas, the method of argument, the way you listen to each other, and the tolerance that you have for different kinds of views is all a defining attribute of any society.
We seem to have experienced some technical snag for a few seconds, Raghavan. So I did
Yeah.
not have the benefit of hearing you. I do wish to bring in our viewers at this point, and a colleague and a fellow member at Chandigarh Literary Society, Mr. Daljit Chima, has a question for you. And he says, is that really fair to fictionalize historical facts to suit an individual writer's perspective? Your response to that?
See, I have tried to be um, uh, as accurate as possible with the historical timelines. You know, so the
Correct.
events that are happening there and the actual situations that were developing, the 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 invasion of Alexander and the coming to being of the Mauryan Empire and all that. So all of them, I feel I try to check the facts and try to be as accurate as possible. And there are certain one or two assumptions that I
Right.
made, like particularly the South, because South, the history, only very recent archaeological evidences have proved that the
Yes.
urbanization in the South started as far back as the North, because a lot is talked
Mm.
about the urbanization in the Gangetic Plain, but in the South,
Yes.
the urbanization that was there is not so much well documented. But there are uh, enough poems and
There's
now
evidence to
enough
show.
architectural
Yes.
evidence to prove that. So these are
Correct.
some assumptions have to be made. Something I stretch the timelines a bit here and there, but in
Right.
terms of historical things that are happening, I feel that I can defend every one of them. And of course, my opinion of Arthashastra or my opinion of the statecraft of the Mauryan Empire is a writer's opinion. You know.
Of course, of course. No, to that extent, I think I agree with some of the interpretations that you have drawn as your deductions of the experience of writing this story. One of them being that there was no Aryan invasion. It was basically the migrational integration or exchange from various parts of the subcontinent at that point of time to give us the ethnic flavors that we have today. And the unity in diversity comes from that. Similarly, you are talking about this whole notion of the script, the Brahmi script and the Indus Valley script and the languages and the linguistic variations that one experiences. So, all in all, I feel that Yugantar is indicative of the power of one in terms of arising from the periphery, or so to say, it circumvents those corridors which do not have the prominence of history being fair to them. They could be a footnote, but it is the footnote which correctly projects the narrative's relevance to a reader. So, to that extent, these little characters, whether a monk, I mean, a monk being a rebel, and the shades are very prominent in his observations, in his dialogues, or
Yeah.
the name of a character like Sayana. You know, the Sayana is indicative that somebody who is sensible, because the word itself is denotive of correctness and reasonable disposition. So I think, all in all, a great book to read. Definitely recommend it to an 18-year-old and an 80-year-old. And heartfelt gratitude for your time and patience. And just as I had opened with few lines, I'm tempted to close with something that I found particularly interesting. And I'd like to share it with the readers. On the one side, we are draining the world's gold and gems to make exotic jewelry and getting wines from wineries several thousand kadams away. On the other side, here are naked children and dying babies waiting for morsels of food. What is the point of all this? Blurted out Madhavi in a tone mixed with disgust and sadness. And on that note, I am going to leave it as a question mark, because we are experiencing very similar episodes around us today, and we are in a pensive mood. But I hope Yugantar and the readers of Yugantar are able to change that by wanting to change themselves. Thank you very much, Raghavan Srinivasan. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation. Thank you, Chandigarh Literary Society, for giving me this honor of moderating this wonderful exchange. And thank you, audience. I hope you had a very pleasant evening with some ideas and thoughts that might you want to share with others. Namaskar. Good evening.
Thank you all, and thank you, Suparna, and thank you, CLS, and all who made this possible. So thanks a lot, and thanks for the patience of the listeners. It is in this kind of one way, it is a bit hard to get a feel for what they really think, but I think over a period of time we will get to know each other better.
Certainly, I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.